Hello, everyone. Before you begin this episode, I did want to let you know that the content that David and I discuss includes alcoholism and drug use. And while we don't go into a great level of detail on either topic, I do understand that these subjects can be distressing, and I do encourage you to take care of your well-being as always. So if you feel that you may be triggered by these discussions, it may be best just to skip this particular episode. Okay, thanks very much for your understanding, and please do take care. Hello and welcome to another episode of the Best Stew interview series. It's Gary here again. Thanks very much as always for joining me. And today we've got something a wee bit different. I'm joined by my good friend and founder of one of the world's most popular podcasts dedicated to all things Rangers Football Club in Glasgow, Scotland, Heart and Hand, the Rangers podcast. Now, typically, David and I talk about Rangers whenever we get together on a podcast. So today we're going to mix it up a wee bit and talk about his journey to this point, because it's quite a colourful journey in and of itself in terms of self-awareness, self-improvement, self-development, and looking at opportunities that are out there. And David's life hasn't been without its challenges, including some incredible highs and some incredible lows, and we'll get into some of those as we go through. So this is typically the point where I would do a bit of a bio for David as an introduction. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to turn it over to David and give us, kind of take us back to the beginning, as it were, and what your life was like before Heart and Hand became your life.
Mm. Yeah, hi Gary. Thanks for asking me on. It's nice to be here, and I hope some of the experiences I share maybe of some use to your listeners. There will be differences, of course, but there'll be similarities as well, and hopefully they can take something from that. Yeah, well, basically what happened was I was, football fan my whole life. Went to university, came out of university, and like a lot of arts graduates, Gary, I didn't really know what I wanted to do,
Yeah.
and I was in that place where you sort of go, you're in your 20s, and I'd bought a flat with my girlfriend at the time, and was living, an active social life. I was enjoying myself, as anyone at that age should do. And I kind of fell into a career that I didn't like, I really didn't enjoy, but the money was good.
Yeah.
And I ended up working in that for around about 10 years. But it wasn't uh, it was not a good experience. I really genuinely disliked it. Work was a chore. And if you ever saw me every day, I looked like I was going to be a rower on the galleys, when I was going to work in the morning. And it was long hours, but as I say, the money was good. And then it was all to kind of fund my lifestyle, which was, as I say, a lot of fun. Um, I am an alcoholic. I'm a recovered alcoholic. I'm 15 years sober today as we speak, and I, I don't. I think you're personally. I think you're born alcoholic. I think it's a mental thing, a type of, and alcohol is only a symptom, in the way that drugs or gambling or any other addiction, food even, that you might want to mention, is it's a mental thing rather than a physical thing. And it got worse and worse through time.
Mhm.
And part of that was my unhappiness in my job, and my relationship wasn't going well. And eventually, it all just crashed, as it tends to do. And I ended up divorced, homeless, no job, all of those things. And I thought, right, I can't go on like this. And I went to Alcoholics Anonymous. And first of all, I got sober, because you can't do anything from that. And then I thought to myself, I've got another, maybe, well, I was 30, 31 at the time. I thought, probably another 40 years in work. I can't, I can't continue to have a job that I hate. Mentally, it's crushing me, and the money doesn't make up for that.
Yeah.
I'm not, I'm not the most financially driven person in the world. I do well. I won't lie to anyone. I live very comfortably, but I'm not the type of guy who is right in a year I'll move here and I'll go up this salary band and then a year I'll go after that. I've never been like that. So for me, it's a case of just saying, right, I want to do something I'm interested in that I'm happy doing. And I decided I would have a career change. I was very interested in web, which was still sort of really still emerging. You're still talking just about a decade into it, really. Certainly in terms of mass culture, some of the websites that have been and gone since then, MySpace, Bebo, you know, things
Yeah.
that looked enormous. Yeah, even Yahoo, one
Yeah.
time biggest company, AOL. Remember them? So big that
Yeah.
they were able to buy Time Warner. So yeah, I thought I'm going to try and get into that, and I took an entry level position and did that for 6 months, and the money was very very low, but I enjoyed the work.
Yeah.
And obviously, I wasn't going out at night anymore anyway, and living in bars, so I was able to focus on it. And from that, I then went and was able to get a second job and a third job and build up and contracted for a couple of years to get a wide range of experience and built it up. And at the time, to then get back to how Heart and Hand came about, I had been what people who maybe don't follow sports teams might not know is that there is a more activist branch of it, and that's when you get involved in, if you like, the supporter culture. And one of the things that I did was join a group called the Rangers Supporters Trust, who had concerns about the way that the club was being managed and wanted to fight for supporters' representation and for the club to take into account supporters' views. And I was their media spokesman, so I did a lot of TV and radio work during that period. And it was reasonably high profile in Scotland anyway. And it wasn't an easy job at all,
Yeah.
because half the people in the country hated you and the other half um, thought that you should say exactly what they wanted you to say. So it could be quite difficult. And at the time, I was, you know, uh, drunk on a lot of other substances and fairly abrasive in my personality. A typical guy that age. I had that curious mixture that I think a lot of people have. I think it's prevalent among males, but not exclusive. And that is that I had that mix of deep, deep insecurity masked by enormous bullishness
Yeah.
and almost arrogance. And that contrast can drive you mad
Yeah.
internally. When you're presenting yourself to the world as something, and then you get home you're lying in your bed, and that voice at 3 a.m., the one that tells you the truth,
Yeah.
uh, that was the one that was going, "You're a phony,"
Yeah.
and that one's hard to quiet, and that's why you use alcohol and drugs. It's self-medication.
Yeah.
So I'd done that for a few years, and when I finished up, I thought I don't want to do that anymore. I'm sober now, and I'm changing my life totally. Um, just little things I started to do because I realized once I got sober, and you work through with AA a lot of steps, as people may know about, they may have heard of these, but a lot of it's about self-improvement. It's learning to live sober. It's learning, why is that your first option? Because anyone can stop drinking. You just stop drinking.
Yeah.
But until you cure yourself of the desire to do the harmful thing, you're going to keep doing it.
Yeah.
So I thought I'll start trying things, because I was always the king of I'm going to do,
Right.
right? Like I'm going to join a gym.
Yeah.
I'm going to go hiking. I'm going to go and join a band.
Yeah.
And I'll do it tomorrow, but right now I'll just have a drink.
Yeah.
And of course, the tomorrow never came round. So I realized after a while, all these things that I thought, well, I can't do that. I realized the only person that's holding you back from doing it is you.
Yeah.
You're the only person who is stopping you from doing. Who says you can't go and join a golf club? You
Yeah.
might be rubbish at golf, but you can go and try it. And that's what I did. And there were things I tried and I liked, and there were things that I tried and I didn't like and I didn't enjoy. But all the things I had talked about doing through my 20s, I did join bands,
Yeah.
for the first time since I was 15. and we played live in the city, and it was fantastic, and I thoroughly enjoyed that. And I did join a gym, and I did that for a few years, got really into it. Then I moved on to other things, and one of the things doing that was I had started because I had these long commutes that I mentioned earlier. Uh, Sometimes you could get a little bit bored with just, sitting listening to music in the morning. I'm one of these people who on public transport, I have to have the headphones in, and just into my own wee world to get set for the day, basically, right? What do I need to do? Yeah, I'm sure. At 9 o'clock, I've got this meeting. 10 o'clock, I want to have that completed. So I would go into my own wee zone. And one of the things I would do to kill a bit of time on the journey, because it was about 2 hours there and 2 hours back, was I started listening to podcasts, which were in their infancy at the time. Now, I think my dog has a podcast, right? But back then, it was a lot rarer, and there weren't as many to choose from. And because of that, I started listening to general football ones. And then I found one that was a club specific one. I found a couple actually that were London clubs, Arsenal and Tottenham Hotspur. And I'm not a fan of either of those clubs, incidentally.
Yeah.
I'm totally neutral on both of them. But I listened to this and it was funny and I enjoyed it. And I thought, that would be great if there was a similar one for my club, if there was one for Rangers. And I would recommend these shows to friends. And they would come back and say, wouldn't it be great if there was one like this for our club? And I said, yeah. And they went, you should do it. I thought, I can't do it. I don't know how to do it. And they said, well, learn. I thought, yeah, why not? So I learned how to put together a podcast. And I phoned the guys who actually ran these two podcasts. I phoned the production company that did it. And I said, look, my name's David Edgar. It's at the RST. Here's some of my media work. I think I can draw an audience with this, right? I think, and the key thing for me was because nobody else was doing it,
Yeah.
and I thought, well, the stuff that was in the media about football didn't reflect my experience as a football supporter, and so they said, yeah, sure, go ahead and do it, and that's how it started, and it really was that simple, and I think it is. If there is one thing I would suggest to people, it is go and do it, and don't go into it for, if you like, the wrong reasons, Gary. And I do now still get people, because podcasts in particular have grown a lot over the last years. I get people coming up to me and they say, I want to do what you do. And I'm like, that's great. Okay. Why? No, what do you mean why? And I'll say, well, why do you want to do this? Oh, I think it'd be great. You're very successful. And I'm like, that's the wrong reason,
Yeah.
right? Do it because you think it sounds fun. Do it because you've got something to say that
Yeah.
nobody else is saying. Do it to have a laugh. Don't do it to be successful.
Yeah.
It's the same with, I think, anything in life. Do it for the right reasons, because if you do it for the wrong reasons, then you're starting off a project, if you like, with a flaw in the design straight away, and
Yeah.
then you're only building on a flaw. And I've told people this before, that I don't care if you've got 100 listeners who love what you do. That's better than having 5,000 who aren't interested in it, and who'll give you a go occasionally if there's nothing else. You're much better. Get people to care about what you do because it's good, because then you'll get the sense of satisfaction and it'll grow, and you won't spend your time going, well, maybe if we do this, will more people listen? Maybe if we do that. Go and do your own thing and see what comes of it. And it all came about because, as I say, of that realization, which I didn't get till I was in my 30s, of why not? It might fail, but who cares?
Yeah. Yeah, I really love that. And one thing that you mentioned very briefly there just during your chat was that the mainstream media, in particularly in Scotland at the time, in the west of Scotland, to be a bit more geographically specific, was doing what the mainstream media did. They were reporting the way that they've always reported, and that was, the way that I have that in my head anyway, David, is that that was a gap that you had said. There's not something exclusive for Rangers fans, to talk about Rangers things in a Rangers way. I'm not putting words in your mouth here, I hope, but tell me a little bit more about that, because I think that's an integral gap that you identified, whether it was consciously or subconsciously.
Well, everyone complained about it. And look, every sports team in the world, the supporters thinks that the media don't like their team.
Yeah.
right? Because we're very one-eyed about it. And I get that, incidentally. Um, and of course, we were no different. And so, and we believe it to be true, but whether or not it's true, it doesn't matter. What I felt was that the experience of being a supporter, which is a wonderful thing, they have ups and downs, but there's nothing like it. You know this, Gary. There's nothing like being with a crowd of people, especially at a club like Rangers that has this deep historical connection.
Yeah.
And that our grandfathers supported and stuff, and you bring through you have a young son who you're getting to experience that with him. I take my nephews to the games occasionally, and it's that community aspect, and I didn't see that represented anywhere. And when I would listen to these shows in the mainstream media, it didn't reflect my experience. They weren't talking about things that we talked about as supporters, which is understandable because the media, we sometimes forget, is a business, and they were doing the things that they thought would draw attention. So, you know, controversy, staged arguments, and it was all very negative. And I thought, I like going to watch my team. I like seeing my pals and we have a laugh and we talk about, is this player good enough? Is that player good enough? And that was what I felt wasn't there. And I found my friends funny, and I thought other people would as
Yeah.
well. So we sat down and we just recorded it, the first one, and we did it. And to tell you how long ago this was now, recording a podcast these days, folk, is really easy. The technology in the 15 years since I started it, or 14 years, sorry, since I started it, has grown exponentially. It's so much easier now than it
Yeah.
was back then. Back then, you had to physically get people in a room
Yeah.
together. You had the proper old mics up, and they would go to a laptop, and it would take you hours to edit it. And it was, the whole process of putting a show together took about 12 hours to,
Yeah.
to turn it around. Now I can record something and have it up, worldwide, honestly, within minutes of
Yeah.
finishing the recording
Yeah.
because the technology has evolved so quickly. And we did it, and the first day it went out, I'd spread it through the kind of usual Rangers channels. We went to number one on the sports iTunes chart, and I thought, okay, well, we've got an audience then, great.
Wow.
And we
Yeah.
just built it from there. And look, I was fortunate because one, I feel like we were in early,
Yeah.
before there were dozens. And because of that, we became to a lot of supporters almost like the brand name for podcasts. People would
Yes.
say, I like this podcast. They would say, I like Heart and Hand.
Yeah.
And we were people's first podcast. People started listening to podcasts because of us. And then it's obviously difficult for people who come along now to
Yes.
break into that because there are so many. And that's to be expected. So we are fortunate in a way that we had that position and we were able to build on it from there. But yeah, as you say, if the mainstream media, and I'm not getting into any, political aspect of this, because it's a sports thing, but in general, if the mainstream media were providing what people wanted, there wouldn't be space for people like me.
Yeah.
And I think that's something that has become, much more prevalent in the last 10 years or so, that people are spotting things. And again, it's niche things. That's the other thing, because the mainstream media, and I do accept this, as businesses, they have to provide to a wide palette of audiences. Of course they do. That makes perfect sense. Whereas I think if you're interested in console games or athletics or macrame, even if you're interested in a hobby and you do it because you enjoy it and you love it, you don't care if it's only going to a few hundred people.
Yeah.
That's fine. Um, and my job in my second career, one of my jobs is I ended up working for a university in Glasgow as their digital media manager, social media, digital media. I'd lecture on that kind of thing. And we set up a podcast for the social work department within there. They would train social workers. Very important role in society,
Yeah.
incidentally. And I set up a podcast for them. And after a couple of weeks, the head of the department came back to me and he said, David, I think it's really good and we're getting great guests and great feedback, but we're only getting about 3,000 downloads a week. And I said, yeah, but who are those downloads? And
Yeah.
I said it's the guys in government, it's the heads of social work, it's important figures. You're influencing your profession in a way that you weren't doing a few weeks ago, because it might only be 3,000, but it's 3,000 people who can change things,
Yeah.
and they're hearing your ideas about it and putting them into practice. So again, I think that we have an ability as individuals to say, I'm going to do this smaller thing because it has value. Whereas, of course, to a commercial organization, they have to say, we would like to do this smaller thing, but it doesn't have financial value to us, so we're not going to do it.
Yeah, exactly. Very much a conversation about reach versus impact. And,
Yes.
if and I think about the NARSA podcast, this is not a plug for my other podcast, but when we were starting the North American Rangers Supporters Association podcast, you and I chatted and got sage advice from you on that and kind of started it as a in my head. This will be 2 minutes just to give you a very brief update as what's happened in North American land in terms of
Mhm.
Rangers and what the games are this weekend, anything that you need to know in terms of Rangers TV. And I've never once done a 2 minute podcast. I think the
Nope.
least the least has been 18 minutes and most has probably been about an hour or so. But in terms of when I was putting the idea together with Brian, my VP, it was basically, almost commensurate with what you were saying there earlier, David, in terms of, what can we do that's, the heart and hand to everyone that I know is the gold standard, is the foundational standard of anything Rangers podcast across the entire globe. And what can we do that would take some of the best bits of that and then put our own spin on that? Our own spin on that, of course, is we are the North American Rangers Supporters Association. So we can talk about things that are material for North American fans, bringing in a sprinkle of things that we've heard about from other areas. So our reach isn't as quite as general as other podcasts that are out there, but specific to our audience, and people from afar are quite interested in it a wee bit as well. But never getting consumed by the numbers, ever getting consumed by the numbers. If we had one download a week, I would be thrilled and delighted saying that one person got some sort of value. It's the same for this podcast in terms of the best a coaching podcast and the interview series as well. And I know it sounds a little bit cliche, but genuinely, in terms of impact, if there's one person that listens to this and gets something from it in terms of how to set up a podcast, how to take some steps and try some things after the realization that alcoholism is a prevalent factor in your life, like that's a win. That's a win in
Mhm.
any measurement criteria you could ever put to it.
Oh yeah, well, yeah. I mean, this is like I I talk on my podcast because the thing is as well, people might think it's a sports podcast. You talk primarily about sports, and we do talk primarily about sports. But in a later iteration of the podcast, at first we started out that we would do a couple of podcasts a week, and they would go out for free on iTunes. Or we started out just in one a week, and then we went to two a week. And then what happened? Just after I turned 40, actually, arbitrary numbers really, but we
Yeah,
set great stores by them, don't we? Certain. I mean, why is anything different 40 to 41 to 39? It's not, but you turn 40 and you start to think about different things. And the place I was working in was offering excellent redundancy packages if you'd been there a number of years, which I had. And I had this germ of an idea um, for what I might want to do as the kind of next iteration of our podcast. So I took the money, and then me being me, I then sat about and had fun for like 6 months, just walking my dogs and uh, you know going going for lunch with my wife and stuff. But then I said, right, okay, it's time to start this, and we started a subscription service online where rather than just the free ones, although they still go out and they're still free, always
yeah,
will be, that we would also do extra shows and people could pay for it. And I put it at a very low amount, and I still make sure it's affordable. We still do a £1.99. It's about 250 US dollars. You'll need to do the Canadian one for me.
that's about
Uh,
1,600 Canadian dollars right now with the exchange
right.
rate.
With the exchange rate, right? So it's basically it's 50 pence a week.
Yeah,
And the initial plan I had, because I'm not a details person, and I'll be the first to admit that. I'm a I'm more a big picture guy, as the saying goes, um, because I like, the idea and to put it into practice, but the actual nuts and bolts of it are better left to other people.
Yeah.
But I recognize that, so I get in other people who like detail,
Yeah.
who maybe aren't, ideas people, and love nothing more than being given a list of tasks.
Yeah.
Go and complete this. So I got together a group of people, and the idea that I had is I thought, right, we've been quite successful. I think there's a lot of talent out there that doesn't have or doesn't know how to put that into play, basically. I think there'll be a lot of people who are talented who think they've got something to offer but have no outlet for it. So what we did was we started it off, and it was me and my group of regular podcasters. But we opened the doors up on day one and said, look, if you want to come and do a show, you have an idea for a show, come and tell us, because we can teach you how to do it.
Yes.
What we can't do is, teach you the desire to do it.
Mm.
And people started coming along, and they would say, I've got this idea and I've got that idea. And we'd go, great, yep, okay. If it wasn't a good idea, we would say, sorry, that one doesn't really fly. But, the vast majority of people, because the ideas were worthy, um, we would set up and show them how to do it. And what I kind of envisioned, and it's funny how, Gary, it changes through time, what I envisioned doing, and I should say we'd built up a good audience by this stage. We were getting about 150,000 downloads per week. We're sitting now, a few years later, at 250,000 in the free shows.
Yeah.
But it's hard to convert people from free content to paying content.
Yes.
And again, I was quite fortunate because it wasn't, I hadn't had to sink a lot of capital into it, and it wasn't, if this goes wrong, I'm gambling everything on it. It wasn't that. So I was able to go at a more relaxed pace and do it. But we got a big audience on day one again, a few thousand, and that was able to give us a kind of head start on that. So the idea I initially had was almost as a bit of an incubator, where people would come along and they would do their show with us for 2 or 3 months, and we would sort of introduce them to the audience, and then they would go off on their own. And that was the plan. But soon everybody began to one, they all started, enjoying it. And the other thing is, I make all our people, we've maybe got about 50 or 60 contributors, and I make them work together and socialize together, if you like.
Yeah.
Because otherwise it doesn't sound like a group of friends, which is
Yes.
what it should do. It should always sound like a group of people who know each other. So, but so they eventually realized we could actually do something special here if we stay together, as opposed to all splitting off in different directions. And a couple have, and that's great. We always support them.
Yeah.
Some people say, well, why are you supporting what's a rival podcast? And I'm like, because I'm of the belief that if what I do is good, it will find an audience.
Yeah.
And if what I do is not good, it will not.
Mm.
And therefore, if someone else goes off and does something, that shouldn't be a danger to me.
Yeah.
Because the thing that will be a danger to me is me. And the idea that I'm going to spend time trying to kill, and bring down people because they're doing a different thing to me is that, me, I don't have the time or the inclination to do that. It's so petty and pointless. This is going to sound arrogant, and it isn't, but it's more a moral thing. That sort of behavior is beneath me.
Mm.
I would be disappointed in myself
Yeah.
if I was doing that. There's room for everybody. And if you're good, I think you will find an audience. So they ended up staying, and over the years we've built up this second iteration of it. It's a paid for site, and we now do 5 or 6 shows every day. With the idea being, I've always liked the idea of the old circus thing, which was something for everybody. And by that, the cliche says, you might come for the lions, but if you don't like the lions, you'll like the acrobats. If you don't like the acrobats, you might like the clowns, and that's always been my thing, to do different things. And this is a long-winded way to get to the point. After a little while, we were doing obviously shows about Rangers, and that's still our bread and butter. And then people said, could you do shows about other football as well, not involving Rangers? And so we
Yeah.
started doing those. And then people said, you should do just some entertainment shows as well. And we started doing pop culture, TV. One of our popular shows actually is a history show because both myself and Martin, one of my podcasters, we are graduates in history and
Yeah.
take an active interest in it. So we're passionate about it. So that I think comes across as well. But one of the things I decided to do fairly openly was just be quite open. And I would talk about my alcoholism. I would talk about my experiences, my mental health, not every day, not shoehorning it in, but just occasionally, mentioning. And the reason to do that was to say to people, look, if you have an issue, I know how difficult it is
Yes.
to make the first step because it's a big loaded word, alcoholic, right? And nobody has it on their life plan. Nobody cartwheels into treatment or into AA for it. But it was just to say, look, I know it's maybe difficult to talk with your family at first about it. So here's somebody you kind of know, you've got to know over the years.
Yeah.
Get in touch with me. It's totally anonymous. And people have been able to do that. So to your point about helping people, making it worthwhile. If we were to stop tomorrow, one of the things I would be most grateful for is that I know literally hundreds of people have gone to get help after listening to it for either addiction or for mental health even, and just had someone to talk to that maybe opened up a door and hopefully removed a wee bit of the stigma
Yes.
from that. Because you know as well as I do, Gary, that for West of Scotland males our age in particular,
Yes.
especially working class uh, males from where we are from, you didn't talk about stuff like that.
No.
You didn't talk about how you were feeling.
Yeah.
You didn't talk about I think I'm drinking too much. You kept it inside, and
Yeah.
of course it finds its way out in other worse behaviours.
Mm.
But I think we are now at a stage where, as you say, you begin to get a wee bit more comfortable, and I'm comfortable with who I am. It took me a long time to be, and I think the biggest thing was realizing, do you know what? I've got flaws, and what I do now with my flaws is this a big one that I really can't live with? And if the answer is yes, then I work on it.
Yeah.
And I try to change it. If it's a minor one that I could, in an ideal world, I would rather be like I can be quite loud. See, when I get excited,
Yeah.
I can be very loud. So if we're out somewhere, and we're telling stories to each other and having a nice time, you might hear me above the hubbub of a bar, and I'll catch myself sometimes and go, "Oh Christ!"
Yeah.
But and I used to beat myself up for that, and now I go, "Do you know what? You're excited, right? You can be a bit loud. Somebody might tell you to shush. Nobody will remember it in 5 years' time."
Exactly.
So it's about learning to live with those minor imperfections, which we all have, not beat yourself up, not overthink them. And at the same time, to recognize that you do have bigger flaws that you can't live with. And
Yeah.
those are the ones that I'll need. Well, I'll give you an example of this. I I think the term is probably narcissistic, and that comes across as preening and arrogant, and it's not. What it is that I automatically my filter is to see things and how it affects me.
Yeah.
That's it's the wrong reaction, but it's always my first one.
Mm.
So if instance, my wife says to me, "Oh, I'm feeling ill," I'll go, "Oh God, she's feeling ill. I need to look after her." Not not empathetically going, "Oh, my wife feels ill."
Yeah.
And in the old days, the old me, I would have just blurted out, "Oh, Christ, does that mean I need to look after you?" Which
Yeah.
is the wrong thing to say, right? And I would, the other person would like it, and I'd hate myself for saying it eventually. Whereas now I've learned to shut my mouth,
Yeah.
get rid of, let that first thought play out,
Yeah.
and then go, yeah, but she's not well, and you need to look after her. And in fact, you're going to, and it's part of this, and she does the same for you. And it's, aren't you fortunate to have this relationship? And give her a hug, and go and make chicken soup or whatever. And that was something that I had to kind of deal with. Recognize here is a flaw that I have.
Yeah.
Doesn't make doesn't make me a bad person.
Yeah.
Not acting on it once I've
Yes.
realized makes me a bad person.
Yeah.
So it was then I have this thing I can control and I can improve upon. And over the years, then my reaction has got, more better where I won't be quite. But in the old days, it was literally my wife said, "Oh, well, I'm going to the pub tonight regardless." It
Yeah.
was that kind of thing as opposed to take a step back, look at the bigger thing.
Yeah.
Um, but that as I say, and I don't want to make it sound like, oh, listen to me how wise I am. I had to go through a lot of pain to realize this stuff. The
Yes.
only thing that taught me was pain, unfortunately. And it was a wonderful teacher, but my God, it was an expensive lesson.
Absolutely. It's so many rich pieces of data in there, and just quite simply the self-awareness, the self-awareness to say, right, okay, we've been we've been here before. It's not worked out in our favor. Longer term, the reactions before, what would be the next best step? And deeper within that, the acknowledgement is my thoughts are not me. They're a part of me, but that doesn't
Yes.
make them me. So then, creating that psychological distance between your thoughts and then your actions gives you the best opportunity to take the next best step, which is something that's going to be appropriate, palatable, sensible, caring, right, things
Yeah.
like that.
No, you're so right. And the reason is because here's the incentive behind it. See, when I do the wrong thing, I feel rotten about it
Yes,
later. I
yes,
feel bad. I blurt something stupid out. So there's a selfish element behind trying to do the right thing, which is then I won't feel bad.
yeah,
It's not selflessness. It's not trying to be an angel. It's actually a bit of self-protection.
yeah,
And as you say, I think there are people who don't care, but they're psychopaths. They are genuinely people who will always just look out for themselves and do the wrong thing and do it unwillingly. But the vast majority of people that I've ever known, when we do something bad, we feel guilty about it and we
yes,
feel shame about it. And I don't like feeling guilty and I don't like feeling ashamed. So I try to avoid putting myself into situations
yeah,
because it's usually me that does it. Very rarely can I be made to feel guilty about something I haven't done. Like guilt trips don't work on me
yeah,
unless it is my fault.
yeah,
In which case I would have hoped that I would have acknowledged it anyway. And it can work to my wife and I talk about this sometimes. We very rarely fight, but in the rare occasions that we do, one of us will go off to another room for a bit. And honestly, within 10 minutes, we'll come back and say, I was wrong. That was me.
yeah,
I had done that. And we'll end up laughing about it because it'll be something silly. That's the thing. It's always something silly that
yeah,
sets it off. And I couldn't do that in previous relationships. In previous relationships, I would know I was wrong, but I'll be damned if I'm telling her that.
double down.
you know,
Yeah,
um, and my partner would be the same,
yeah,
and that was just how we'd grown up, and you mimic the behaviors of the
yeah,
people around you. That was sort of what you did, and the old comical thing of the stereotypical thing of the man has done something and the woman puts him into the deep freeze for a few days about it. But we'd grown up around that and aped those behaviors even though we didn't like them.
yeah,
And instead now, I think, and again, this is, we've had to learn this. It hasn't something that's come naturally to either of us. But now we will go away and go, look, did I did I do that? Was it me? And sometimes, by the way, I'll go, actually, no, that was her. And I'll wait for her to come through and she'll say, that was me.
yeah,
And I'm fortunate that way I have a partner that can do that because it wouldn't work for me. Otherwise, Sally jokes about it that just after my wife, Sally, just after I moved in with her, um, we had one of those. I'd done something unwittingly. I can't even remember what it was. And she was just having a bad day. But I said, are you okay? And she went, I'm fine. I went, okay. And I went through to my little man cave for like 4 hours watch TV. And then eventually she came through and said, well, I'm not fine. I said, well, you're a grown up. Tell me what's
Yeah.
wrong and I'll see if I can deal with it. But I'm not doing the whole, I'm too old for that shit, basically.
Yeah.
And she laughed. And since then, we've thrashed that out and we've said, let us both be the person. And there are times, by the way, where we'll agree to disagree,
Yes.
uh, but realize it's not the end of the world. And I think that was a big thing for me in terms of that, Gary, was not having to be right all the time,
Yeah.
which it took me years to realize was actually insecurity.
Yeah.
That inability to accept I was wrong, because I think that there's a human reaction to it. When you say something stupid and somebody corrects you, you feel embarrassed, so you
Yeah.
kind of get defensive and lash out.
Yeah.
But again, I think a big part of that is when my life exploded when I was in my 30s. See, after that, you kind of lose that, because you've been, you know, uh, you've been in the gutter basically. You've
Yeah.
been at your lowest point, and you realize afterwards that, well, nothing's as bad as this.
Yeah.
So, did I say something that turned out to be incorrect? Wow, who cares basically? And
Yeah.
I've got this system I do that maybe might be useful to some of your listeners. That again, it's a self-defense thing. Again, it's a mechanism. I don't like feeling bad, so I try to avoid feeling bad if possible. Um, so I'll do this thing. It's a wee checklist I do. First of all, I'll say, what's bothering me, right? And I'll say, well, it's this guy at work um, said that the project I did was late. How dare he?
Yeah.
So then I'll do the next question, which is the important one, which is what's really bothering me? Not the first thing that I've thrown up. What
Yes.
is actually under that? And then I'll go, this guy at work said that the project's gone off because my work was late, and he's right. And I feel bad about that.
Mm.
And I lashed out because how dare he say the thing that I feel bad about?
Yeah.
It's that. So then I'll go, okay. So then the next step is, once you've identified the issue, is to say, is there anything I can do about this? And if the answer is no, you go, okay, and let it go. If the answer is yes, you go to the next question, which is there anything I can do about it right now? Or will it have to be something that waits down the line? And if the answer is yes, you do it. And if the answer is no, you note when you can do it and you do it. And that just clears away so much debris that otherwise lies in your path. If you can just accept and say, I keep saying accept a lot, and it is part of addiction and recovery, acceptance, and that's why it becomes a big word to
Mm.
me. Um, and some people mistake it within people who've been through recovery. Some people mistake it as passivity. It's not passivity. It's just controlling the controllables,
Yeah.
and a realization that there are things that will just happen. And I used to worry a lot. I was a bad worrier, Gary. I mean, just constantly. And then, of course, when you start worrying, your brain runs off in 1,000 different directions at once. And you go, well, if this happens, then that might happen. And if that happens, then this will happen. And you end up starting every kind of action from an incorrect thought because it's
Yes.
built up from this one. And I compare it to the end of a Jenga game when the thing's all piled up and just about to fall,
Yeah.
because it's built on a foundation that isn't solid anymore. And
Exactly.
that's what happens when you overthink. I think that you create scenarios and you're then acting against you're trying to deal with these things that aren't actually real, the thing that
Yeah.
you've created. And so what I'll do is I'll go, right, okay, well, is there anything here that I can do? And if the answer is no, then I let it go.
Yeah.
And that doesn't come naturally to me. I did have to learn. But
Mm.
what I'll say to your listeners is once you start putting that into practice and doing it regularly, eventually it will become second nature for you to do that. And as you know, sometimes you and I will be talking about football, and you'll say, how do you feel about this? And I'm like, I haven't thought about it. And
Yeah.
it's literally that. I haven't thought about it because I can't affect this today.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to worry about something that may cause an issue down the line. But when I get to that issue, I'm now more confident that if something happens, I'll be able to deal with it,
Yeah.
as opposed to I need to make sure it doesn't happen so I can prevent it.
Yeah.
And it's just the same. Have I done all the things that I can do to ensure that things are going well? And if the answer is yes, then I don't stress about, but what if?
Yeah.
Because as it said in the wonderful 30 Rock TV show, hypotheticals is just your brain lying to itself. And there's a lot of truth in that.
You know, there really is. And one of the things that resonated for me with what you just said there in terms of the creative way that our brains can
Yeah,
spin a yarn. You know, when I meet, and I used to say this a lot, like I'm not creative, and but in my head it was like literally creative. Like I'm not an artist. I
a
can't.
painter, yeah, or a
Yeah,
musician,
something
yeah.
like
No,
that.
absolutely.
But then the more I've delved into self-education, self-development, you know, and I meet people who say I'm not creative, I'm thinking that's 100% false, because the stories that you have made up about your life and the stories that you think are actively happening right now
The
are,
scenarios,
yeah, are
yeah.
fantasies, and they are so elaborate in terms of what's going on in between your ears, that you're one of the most creative people that I've met in the last
Uh,
decade.
That's a
And
that's a great point. I mean, I've never thought of it like that, and it's so true that we can spend so much energy,
yeah,
emotional and mental energy, which is the most draining kind to spend, I think, even more so than physical, because it ends up being physical.
yeah, yeah,
We spend so much time battling these things that don't actually exist.
yeah,
And it is, it's unfair because it's your brain, which is the thing that has to solve it, that has created it in the first place. And
exactly.
it's kind of that here, hang on a minute, you're supposed to be working with me.
Yeah,
And yet you're the one that's creating these barriers. And I think it very much is that. And look, some of it is, self-defense and whatnot. There are things we all need to hedge against. That's why we have pensions, for example. So I'm not saying that you never ever do any future planning. That's not what I'm saying at all. Of course you do. What I'm saying is that you don't sit down and say, I want to insure. You can insure yourself against, you can get building insurance in case your house is, struck by a car or whatever,
yeah,
right? But you can't insure yourself against everything. It's not possible.
yeah,
And even if it does, even if you could, even if you somehow managed to get a policy against every single act of God that was out there, you found some insurance firm willing to do it and you could afford it, you're still going to have to deal with the thing when it happens,
yeah,
right? It doesn't, just because you are, right, I'm insured if my house spontaneously combusts,
yeah,
you still need to deal with the flames. But if
yes,
you sit about worrying that my house could spontaneously combust, um, then that to me is a waste of emotional energy, and I wasted so much of it. And again, I take it back. That's why I drank so much, because it was, I just want to turn this off.
yeah,
These mile a minute thoughts. I'll drown them.
yeah,
And it worked. They would drown temporarily, but they would come back the next day with their pals, and they'd
yeah,
multiplied through the night. And now I had a hangover
yeah,
on top of it to tack onto it. So I think that, yeah, it's, for me, it's about trying to harness that creativity. And I've never really thought of it like that, but you're right. It's trying to harness all that emotional energy, all those storyboards that you're producing in your brain, and put them to some positive use. And I'm still bad for concentration in terms of, I want to do 100 things at once. And we're all kind of like that, there's a great song, and the lyric is that we've got the big screen in the corner, and if it doesn't entertain us enough, we've got the little screen in our hand.
yeah,
And it's kind of true. There are so many options, and technology's evolved at such a pace that, who knows, maybe the human brain hasn't quite caught up with it yet. Have we evolved at the same rate that technology has? So sometimes I do have to very consciously sit down and say no. Put
yeah,
the screen down, turn the screen in the corner off, fold the laptop away, pick up a book. And
yeah,
then my mind will go, oh, but I wonder, no,
yeah,
no,
yeah,
read the book, read the
yeah,
page, and go with that. And sometimes it is an actual effort to do
yes,
that, but it's one that I think I need to make, because otherwise I will dash about and I'll be a dilettante and I'll do, you know, 20% of this and 7% of that and 16% of that, and it's no, I'm going to give 100% to this for
Yeah,
an hour, and then I will go and I'll do task two, because you're right, my brain is still providing these scenarios, still
yeah,
providing them. It's just now I've got better at saying, uh, that one you're getting shoved into, you know,
yeah,
it's like the filing system in your brain. You know, you're this thought brain, you're trying to file into ongoing concerns when it should be filed into I made this up.
yeah.
And it's just trying to force it into the right pigeonhole.
100%. You know, I kind of I'm asked that as or label that, sorry, as I listen differently now. I
Mm.
used to listen to everything as absolute gospel and act upon that, and now I'm kind of like, you know what? Tell me a bit more about that before I even do anything about it. And then you find that a lot of these creative, wacky scenarios in your head exhaust themselves, you know, before they even, you know, gather any speed, which I used to fuel at some point in the past. It's incredible. David, this has been an absolutely fantastic conversation. Thank you very much, as always, my friend, for taking the
Oh,
time.
it's always great to get together with you, Gary. I always look forward to it, mate.
Absolutely, absolutely, and I hope in some way some of the truths that you've told about yourself and even the model there in terms of, you know, the problem and the actual problem and such will be a help to other folks. I truly hope this will not be the last time that we have you on the interview series podcast shows.
Oh, anytime. Just give me a shout. You know that.
You're a good man, my friend. Take care and all the very best.